I think we can proceed.
Okay. All right, so we are back on the record after our mid-morning break. We have our jurors, counsel, and parties present. Agent Marillo is on the stand. And, sir, even though we had a break, I would just remind you that you're still under oath. And with that, Mr. Kodiaga, you may resume your direct examination.
Thank you. I think when we stopped, we discussed briefly about firearms, how they work, what your examination entails. And I don't know if you talked to the jury about the purpose of your examination in trying to find a firearm that has been, or a cartridge or a bullet that has been fired from a particular gun, and what that tells, whether guns or bullets tell a story based on what they leave behind. Can you just explain that briefly to the jury?
Yeah, so I think I talked a little bit about it. On that cartridge case, you're going to have a specific size and shape of the firing pin impression. On the bullet, you're going to have information that's there that we can look at and try to compare that to the rifling on the inside of the barrel of the gun of a suspect firearm. So those are the first things that we will look at. When we actually do a comparison, we're going to look at a little bit more. So when we get a firearm in, I'm going to test fire that gun. I'm going to place one of the test-fired cartridge cases underneath a comparison microscope and then place an unknown underneath the microscope. And I begin looking at both of those items at the same time, side by side. I'm going to begin looking at what we call unique individual characteristics that are inside of that firing pin impression. Tiny little scratches, impressions, tiny little markings, and the same thing on the bullet. The outside of the bullet will not only have that rifling information present, but there are going to be tiny little scratches and striations that come specifically from that barrel of that gun that it was fired from. So I began looking at all the tiny little scratches and striations. It kind of looks like a little barcode, if you will, little lines, thin lines, thick lines, deep lines, shallow lines. And there's a specific pattern that's going to be on every bullet that comes from that particular barrel. And that pattern is going to be unique to that particular firearm and will be different than the pattern that we will see on every other firearm. So that pattern that we're seeing on the fired bullet, the markings that we see on the cartridge case are going to be unique to a specific firearm. So we can look at the test fires from the gun, look at the unknowns, see if they have the same pattern. If they do, then we know that they came from that particular firearm, the unknowns. If they have a different pattern or different shape or different size or different number, then we know that that bullet or that cartridge case did not come from that particular firearm. So we can eliminate it, we can identify it and say, yes, it definitely came from that particular firearm. Sometimes it's inconclusive. You may be able to look at some of the markings and there's just not enough information there. I don't know whether it came from that gun or not. I'm just not sure because of damage, or maybe the gun just isn't producing any markings. There's a lot of different variables, again, that are taken into consideration. So we may call it inconclusive. And the fourth thing that we will sometimes look at is tiny little pieces of evidence that really have no value, and sometimes we'll say that they're unsuitable. So those are the four things that we normally will come to conclusion with when we look at those items. But hopefully what we can do is find the correct firearm and eventually match those bullets, cartridge cases, to a specific firearm.
As part of your job in this particular case, were you tasked with trying to find, there was, I believe, what you've referred to as a cartridge casing that was found at the scene of this crime. Were you trying to match that cartridge casing to certain guns that were delivered to you to see if those guns had been used to fire that cartridge casing?
Yes.
May I approach?
You may. And you don't need to ask again with this witness.
going to hand you what's been marked as State Exhibit 294. Do you recognize what 294 will be?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell the jury what 294 is?
Sorry, 294, State Exhibit 294 is my item 6 as it came into the laboratory. This is a fired cartridge case that came from the scene, and one of the items that I initially looked at that's in my initial report.
So you identify 294 as the casing, what we've called casing, colloquially, or cartridge casing, that came from the scene, that you were tasked with trying to find which firearm had fired that casing.
Correct.
We'll move to admit 294.
No objection, Your Honor.
294 is then admitted.
You've talked about that casing. You determined that that casing was fired from a 22.
Correct. So as we look at that cartridge case, I can tell that it is a 22 caliber, probably from a 22 long or a 22 long rifle cartridge. They both use the same cartridge case. And I can also see the manufacturer. I think this one was made by Winchester, which is a popular ammunition manufacturer. So all that information is in my notes, including the size and shape of that firing pin impression that we talked about. Because it is a fired cartridge case, it's going to have an impression from the firing pin when it hit, and so that information was also documented.
And when you say 22 long, that's a long rifle.
22 long or 22 long rifle, they are different, but they use the same cartridge case.
Now, did you have certain firearms that had been either retrieved from the scene or had been brought to you that you're trying to eliminate or find if they're the ones that had fired that cartridge casing?
Yes, so initially I looked at 2 bullets. I looked at a fired cartridge case, and there was 1 firearm that was also submitted along with those items. So I compared those items to that 1 firearm initially.
And you said you looked at 2 bullets. Can you tell us what those were or what you looked at?
Those were, they're my items 20 and 21. They were bullets that came from the head of the decedent.
Okay. So bullet and bullet fragments that came from Mr. Cooper's head?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State Exhibit 296, 297 for the purposes of identification. Do you recognize what 296 and 97 would be?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what they are?
Item 296 is my item 20. There are actually 2 different bullets, 22 caliber bullets that were in that item. And then State's item 297 is my item 21. 21 is some tiny little fragments of lead that were, in this case, they were unsuitable. They just didn't have any information on them. But an additional fragments that also came from the head as well. And
your lab is also attached to the State Medical Examiner's office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you examine, first I'll move to admit 296 and 297.
Any objection to 296 or 297?
No, Your Honor.
296 and 297 are then admitted.
You observed, thank you. You observed 296 and 97. Can you describe to the jury what the characteristics or what you observed in this, what has been admitted as 296 and 97?
So I kind of talked about 297. Again, it's just tiny little fragments that were unsuitable. There's no rifling information. I couldn't get a caliber, nothing. It's just very, very small fragments of lead that were of no value. The other item, 296, my item 20, there's actually 2 different bullets in there, 2 fired bullets. And so those 2 items are the ones that I looked at. Take the information, rifling information off of those. I weighed them, looked at the composition, all of that. They were very similar to one another, had the same type of rifling on them. Again, 22 caliber bullets coming from a 22 caliber firearm of some sort.
Were they in a damaged condition, or what was their physical condition?
Yeah, I took photographs of them as well, but yes, they were flattened, or the nose, front end of the bullet was flattened quite a bit, kind of mushroomed out. So they were distorted and damaged from impact, and that's pretty normal when a bullet hits something very hard, especially something like this bullet. These bullets, again, are made out of lead. Lead is very soft, so when it hits something hard, it tends to smash and become much more distorted than a copper-jacketed bullet or a brass-jacketed bullet that we will see in other types of ammunition. So not unusual that it was flattened and distorted, but it still had a little bit of rifling information there that I could base some information on.
When you compared the cartridge casing, did you have some firearms then that you tested to see if they were consistent with the cartridge casing that you found, that was found at the scene?
Yeah, so I looked at the bullets, again, compared them to one another. I gave some investigators some information about the gun that they were looking for. There was one firearm that was submitted with these items. It was a Savage rifle that I believe was found at the scene. So I compared these items to that rifle, and that rifle was eliminated as the firearm that was used to fire these items.
And when you say at the scene, fair enough to say it wasn't at the scene where Mr. Cooper was dead, but in that home in Traer.
Yeah, I meant in general. I think it may have been found in another building or something, but it was part of that original search that was done. There was a 22 caliber rifle that was found, so they submitted it. I looked at it, but it was not the correct rifle.
In fact, if your report says it was found in the safe in the red garage, will that be fair and accurate?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so these Savage Arms Rascal bolt action 22 was in a safe in the red garage, and you compared it with that casing that was found inside the house or next to the door, and it was not the firearm that had fired that shell casing.
That is correct.
Did you compare another firearm or any other firearm?
Yeah, there were 3 other firearms that were submitted. One about a month later, I think it was a Ruger pistol. And then another year or 2 later, there were 2 additional firearms, another Ruger rifle, and also a Marlin rifle that were submitted. So I looked at all of those firearms as well, compared them to these items, these unknown items, and did a comparison of those items as well.
And what was your findings from comparing these firearms to that cartridge casing that was known?
So those additional firearms were also eliminated as a suspect firearm, so they were not used to fire the bullets or cartridge cases in this incident.
Okay, they were not the firearms that killed Ryan Cooper.
Correct.
When you looked at the casings and the bullet, were you trying to also find, as you've talked about, that you're trying to look at various firearms or trying to talk to your investigators to look for particular firearms? Were you trying to rule or find which firearm could have fired those bullets?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, I can look at the cartridge case, look at that rifling information that's on the bullets, measure the dimensions of that rifling information. It can be entered into a computer database. We actually have a couple of different computer databases that we use, and those databases will tell us all of the makes and models of guns that have those specific dimensions in their barrels. So that particular list was actually very long. It was several pages long, hundreds of firearms that had that 22 caliber, 6 lands and grooves, right hand twist, the width of the dimensions that I found on all of those hundreds and hundreds of firearms that were on that list. So that list was generated as part of my notes, and also in my report I indicated there is a long list of firearms that could have been used to fire this particular bullet. Hopefully, in some cases, we like to narrow it down so we can say this is the one gun that you're looking for, but unfortunately, the 22 caliber, six right rifling that we found on these bullets is probably the most popular rifling dimensions that we see on 22 caliber rifles. So there are a lot of firearms that have those dimensions, but there was a list that was generated.
Did that list include a Ruger 1022?
Yes, there was a Ruger 1022 that was on the list that I originally generated.
So as part of what you generated and what you're looking for was a possibility of this being that the bullets that killed Ryan Cooper came from a Ruger 1022 long
Yes,
rifle?
that is one possibility, yes.
Okay. Now, how loud is a Ruger 1022 long rifle in a closed, small living room space?
Well, any firearm is going to be extremely loud, especially in a small room. Sound waves are going to bounce off of the walls. You're going to hear it much more loudly, if I can say it that way. So it's going to be kind of the equivalent of a very large firecracker if it were to go off in that room. Every gun is a little bit different. Depends on what's in the room, what the walls are made of, what furniture is in there. So it's a little different for every scene, but it's going to be extremely loud.
Okay. But in a wall that's not from, there's no reason to believe it's soundproof or anything to that extent, and a small room, in the quiet of the night, it will be a loud sound.
Yes, it will.
And 2 shots from a Ruger 1022 long rifle would be two loud sounds.
Yeah, you should hear 2 distinct loud pops or loud bangs, if you will, that are coming from those 2 shots that are being fired.
I have no further questions at this time.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, I don't think you were part of any investigation of firearms that were seized in 2024. Is that right?
No, the firearms I looked at were submitted in 2021 and 2023. I remember there were no. I was not working in 2024. I think I mentioned I retired at the end of 2023. Okay. So anything that came into the laboratory in 2024 would have been examined by another individual.
Okay. And when you talk about sound, there are ways of muffling sounds of firearms.
Yes.
And the other thing that can affect whether or not something's loud in any given environment would be if somebody's running a fan or something like that. It would muffle it, at least to them.
Yeah, if there's other sounds in the room that could, it's not going to make the sound of the gun any less, but it's going to kind of drown out what you're trying to hear. Yes.
It's going to obscure your hearing of it, right?
It could,
Yeah.
yes.
And the 22, that's a small caliber bullet.
It is, yes.
And I assume since the projectile that it has to get moving down that barrel is one of the smallest, that the amount of powder that's needed to make that happen is less than larger caliber bullets.
Yes.
And oftentimes the sound is related to that kind of mini explosion that happens in the chamber, right?
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge. Thank you.
Anything further?
We just have a minute, Judge.
You may.
Nothing else from the state. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you.
Is the state prepared to call its next witness?
State calls Christian Hart.
Good morning, ma'am. Maybe you just come up and take a seat to my far left, if you would. That microphone's on. You can adjust it however you'd like. I'm going to swear you in first, so please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right. And for the record, can you please give us your first and last names and spell them for us?
Yes, my name is Kristen, Kristin, Hart, Hart.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Kodiaga, whenever you're ready.
You've stated your name. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you do for a living?
I am a criminalist at the Iowa DCI Crime Laboratory, where I am in the Firearms and Tool Marks section of the lab.
You've just had Vic Marillo come out of the stand. You work with Vic Marillo, correct?
That's correct.
How long have you been with the DCI Crime Lab?
I've been at the crime lab since 2006 and the firearms section since 2017.
Okay. Do you do similar job that Mr. Murillo does?
Yes, I do.
So I'm not going to bore the jury by going through all about firearms anymore. I think they understand that pretty well. In this case, were you in charge of doing firearms examination?
Yes, I was.
When did you get involved in this case?
I got involved 2024, May-ish of 2024.
Okay. When you got involved, were you, Mr. Murillo has testified that he was in the process of trying to find the particular firearm that had been used to kill Ryan Cooper.
Yes.
Was that part of your task to take over and try to determine which firearm had been used to kill Mr. Cooper?
Yes, it was.
Okay. As part of that, did you then examine certain firearms?
I did.
Can you tell us what firearms you examined?
In the first examination, I examined 5 long guns and 1 handgun. In the second examination that I performed, I examined another rifle or long gun.
Okay. Do you have a copy of your report with you?
I have a copy of the second report, but not the first report.
Okay. Would giving you a copy of your reports help refresh your memory on what you would have examined?
Yes, it would.
Permission to approach?
You may, and you don't need to ask again with this witness.
Do you have a chance to look at your reports and see what you examined?
Yes, I have.
Okay. What were the first items that you examined?
So like we talked about in the report, I've noted here that there was a pistol, a .22 pistol, and then 5 .22 long rifle, long guns or rifles. And those were examined in the laboratory. I testified them, and then I compared them to a submitted cartridge case. And the conclusions of that cartridge case are also in that report.
Okay. Now, beginning with that, there was a cartridge case that's now been admitted as State 294. Was that the cartridge case that had been found at the residence where Ryan Cooper was killed?
So in my report, it's lab item number 6, and yes, there was a cartridge case that was submitted for examination.
And as you say, lab item number 6, when the cases come to you, they get a different number. Back at the residence, it was like a placard 5. When it comes over to the lab, you give it a different number to identify it, so it became a 6.
Yes.
and in this courtroom now we've also given it a number as 294.
Sure.
Okay. Now, when you talked about examining these and ruling out this firearm that as the firearm that fired that cartridge case, correct?
That's correct, in this first report of mine.
Okay. Did you examine other firearms as part of this investigation?
Yes, I did. An additional firearm was submitted, and there was another report that I issued to the comparisons.
Can you tell us the date and what was submitted?
Yes, so on May 31st, my report was issued on May 31st, submitted to the laboratory on May 7th, 2024. There was some items of evidence, including a rifle and the original cartridge case. Additional cartridge cases were also submitted a little bit later, but to the findings of that would be in my report, item 13, or report 13, that comparison was done.
Okay. And when you did the comparison, what was your findings?
The microscopic comparisons conducted on the cartridge case from the scene, they were compared to the rifle submitted in report number 13, and the cartridge case was identified as having been fired in that rifle. In my case, that lab item number 49, it was a Ruger 1022 rifle.
Okay. When did you receive this Ruger 1022 rifle?
It was received on May 7th, 2024.
Okay. And what kind of testing did you do with this rifle?
So the rifle was brought back to my laboratory where I took notes. I examined the rifle, confirmed that it was in working order, and then once I did confirm working order, I confirmed the serial number. I went ahead and test fired that rifle. I collected the known cartridge cases and known bullets from that rifle because I was able to collect those from our laboratory, knowing those came from the rifle. Now I can use them as known samples. And then once I had those known samples, I was able to use those on the microscope, the comparison microscope, which I'm assuming you guys might have talked about already, where we're comparing test-fired cartridge cases to the unknown cartridge case, and that's where the conclusion was made.
What conclusion did you make?
Again, that that cartridge case was fired from that firearm.
Okay, so to be clear with the jury, you finally were able to determine that what had been at the resident as placard 5 came to the lab and became number 6, and now was 294, was fired from that gun.
That's correct.
I'm going to approach and show you what's been admitted into evidence as 298. Just for the court purposes, it's secure. Will you tell the jury what 298 is?
So this is a Ruger 1022, model 1022, 22 long rifle, long gun or rifle, and the serial number on this particular firearm is 0003-61269. So this is the rifle that I examined and test fired in my laboratory.
And is this the same rifle that you identified as the one that had fired those bullets and left a casing that was found and the bullets that had killed Mr. Cooper?
This rifle was compared to the cartridge case, yes.
Okay. And you determined that it's the same that had done that?
Yes.
Okay. You talked about the comparison. Can you just tell the jury in terms of the science and if it might aid you to show your pictures on what you use to, how you do the comparison?
So we talked a little bit about the comparison microscope. So in the case of examination of the testifier cartridge cases, we use a comparison microscope in which we have two stages. We're able to use one eyepiece, and we can examine the cartridge cases across that one eyepiece. So on the left stage, I have the testifier cartridge cases from this particular rifle. On the right, I have the cartridge case from the scene. I use that singular the set of eyepieces. I'm able to compare the markings that are left by this firearm on the testifier cartridge case to the markings that are on the sample from the scene, and take photographs, and then conclude that that cartridge case had been fired from this particular firearm.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for the purposes of identification as State Exhibit 276 through 285. Do you recognize what I've handed you as 276 through 285?
I do, yes.
Okay. Are those pictures that you took as part of your testing for this firearm to determine if it was the exact firearm that had been used to fire those bullets that killed Mr. Cooper?
This is a combination of photos of my first report and my second report, including the comparison photos that I took.
Okay. They're fair and accurate of what you did as part of your analysis?
Yes.
We move to publish 276 through 285.
Do you want to offer them first?
Oh, we move to admit them into evidence.
Mr. Rybaker, any objection?
We have no objection.
All right. Then 276 through 285 are admitted, and we will now publish them. Okay.
Are you able to see that clearly, Ms. Hart?
I am.
Okay. Can you tell us what we see on what's been admitted as 276?
Yes, I can. So to start, what you're looking at here is what I would see through my comparison microscope. So I'm using a set of eyepieces, as I talked about, and on the left you have an image, and on the right we have an image. So I have two stages, I have two spots to put two different cartridge cases. In this particular photo, we're referring to report 11. So we see my lab item 38 down the bottom left-hand corner. That's the testifiers from the item 38, or the rifle, that was submitted. And that on the right side is the cartridge case that was collected from the scene. In this particular photo, you're definitely seeing that there is a difference in the firing pin strike, which is at the 3 o'clock position on that cartridge case. On the left, we have a very narrow rectangular strike. On the right, we have a more typical square rectangle shape firing pin impression. So that's just showing what two different firing pins will look like. This is an exclusion. These are two different class characteristics. So we're seeing two different shaped firing pins. And so that's referring to that report 11 where that firearm was eliminated as having fired that cartridge case on the right-hand side.
Okay. So here you're doing the elimination. This is not the one. You're saying, nope, this is not it.
Correct.
Okay. And that's how the part of the science works, is you can do that microscopic comparison.
That is correct.
What do we see on 277?
So again, on the left side, we have a different testifier from a different rifle, again from that report number 11. Item 39 is actually another rifle. So you're seeing, again, that rectangular shaped firing pin. However, you can tell there's a different shape. That firing pin's a completely different shape from the firing pin impression on the right-hand side, again at that 3 o'clock position. So again, it's a class characteristic that's different, and therefore there's an elimination.
Move to 278.
Again, another test-fired cartridge case on the left, and this is a very distinct, different marking left behind by that firearm. On the left-hand side, that firing pin and that cartridge is moving around in that chamber. So you see some shearing there on the left. That's what that big kind of oval-shaped reflective area is. Versus the evidence on the right-hand side. So again, this is another elimination.
And that elimination is every firearm kind of leaves a fingerprint, so you can tell which prints were taken, if I use normal layman's understanding of fingerprints.
Yes.
Okay. What do we see on 279?
So now this is a picture of item 49, and this is found in report 13. This is the Ruger 1022 rifle that I just showed you a little bit ago. The firing pin impression on the left from the test-fired cartridge case from that rifle has very similar characteristics from this view. Now this is a blown-out view. This is a zoomed-out, distant view, an overall picture of that cartridge case, and so you can start to see, if I refer you to the top 12 o'clock, actually 11 o'clock position, we've got the ejector, we've got a mark in that top left corner, and then you work your way around to the 3 o'clock position, and that firing pin shape and the marks that are in that firing pin are consistent with each other. And from this position here, this overall just gives you a general view. I'll take additional photographs of that breech face marks, of the ejector marks, of the firing pin impression. So that's what you're going to see in the subsequent photos.
I'm going to hand you a pointer so that you can just clarify what you say in the jury. So that you take notice.
Thank you. So I was referring to that 11 o'clock position, these marks here and here, and then that firing pin impression here at the 3 o'clock position. And then there's also some breech face marks, but again, we'll look at those in closer magnification. So this would be the firearm that I identified the cartridge case as having been fired from.
What do we see on State Exhibit 280?
So this is actually kind of turning the cartridge case around on my scope. So instead of the previous photo, which we're looking at the head stamp area of that cartridge case, now we've turned it on its side and we're looking at the chamber marks from the inside of that chamber of that firearm. So again, these are stria. These scratches that go across, this black line is the line of demarcation. So on the left is the left stage of my microscope over here, and the right side of that line is the right stage. So I've got that cartridge case turned horizontally, and I can see these marks that are left from the inside of the chamber. And so you can start at the top and you kind of work your way down, and you can see how these lines here align across that line of demarcation. It's just another mark, another spot within that chamber that helps to identify that cartridge case as having been fired from that firearm.
What do we see on 281?
So this is a cast. So when we are dealing with cartridge cases, we use some casting material. It's kind of like an epoxy. It mixes together, and we're able to apply that to the head stamp. We can pull that casting material off, and it's going to give us a mirror image, if you will, kind of like silly putty. When you pull silly putty off of a newspaper, you'd have that silly putty would leave the newspaper on its surface, and you can read it backwards. That's the same thing that's happening here with that casting material. So now we're able to see what's down, and this is the firing pin impression. So now we're able to see what's at the bottom of that firing pin impression. And again, across, test fire on the left, evidence on the right, and you can start to see these marks here, these impression marks here, and there's some marks down here that we're looking at, come around here. Those are the marks that I used to identify, again, that this cartridge case was fired in this particular rifle.
What do we see on 282?
This, if you remember from that overall picture at that 11 o'clock position, this is the ejector mark that we have on the breech face. And again, shape, we've got the shape and then the small little impressions here. These are what we refer to as, again, individual characteristics, and they line up across both sides of that, of that screen, indicating, again, that identification.
Again, indicating that this is the firearm that fired that casing that was found inside that living room in Trail.
That's correct.
What do we see on 283?
This is just one additional mark, an extractor mark that was found on the breech face or the head stamp area of that cartridge case. Again, just these are photos that are taking pictures of the individual characteristics that I am seeing in regards to supporting my conclusion.
Again, same conclusion, that it's the same firearm.
That's correct.
What do we see on 284?
One more mark that we're seeing on that head stamp from the breech face of that firearm. We're just seeing some marks here that align that I saw on both sides, again, of that firearm and the testifier.
And on 285?
Just a different view of that.
Okay. So your conclusion within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty is that's the same firearm that was used to kill Mr. Cooper?
To the cartridge case that was found at the scene.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Judge, you can take it down. When you examined this firearm, the Ruger, did you find it to have a muffler?
No. It did
What
not
is
have
a
a suppressor.
Yeah, what is that? Can you explain that to the jury?
A suppressor just acts to suppress the sound of the shot being fired.
There's no suppressor on this firearm.
That's correct.
The bullets that were found or retrieved from the body or the head of Mr. Cooper, were you at some point, did you have a chance to try to make a comparison of those bullets as to whether they came from this firearm?
Yes, I did.
And what was your findings in that regard?
In this particular instance, the bullets were in poor condition. The rifling information that was located on the bullets compared to the bullets that I captured from the rifle, so the test-fired bullets, unfortunately I did not have enough individual characteristics to make a conclusion in regards to an identification or an elimination. In this particular case, it was an inconclusive result. It had similar rifling characteristics, so the shape and the size and the number of lands and grooves that were present did align between the unknown bullets and the test-fired bullets. However, there wasn't enough information to go any further than that.
And when you say poor condition, what do you mean? Is that they were damaged and you're unable to use them because of the damage they didn't cut?
They were damaged. The 22 bullets are lead bullets, so they're very soft, so they tend to, one, damage easy, and two, they don't usually have great individual characteristics that are captured from the rifling information inside that barrel. And so in this case, they just lacked the individual characteristics, those small marks, to make any type of conclusion.
And when you talk of the damage, like I said, they were retrieved and have been admitted as 296. 296. They were damaged. Will the damage be when they pierce through skin and meet bone on the face of Mr. Cooper that could cause the kind of damage that you're talking about?
Yes, it could.
Talk of this firearm. When this firearm is fired, as you said, you didn't find it having a muffler when you tested it. what kind of sound, will it make a loud sound when this firearm is fired, especially in a small, closed quarters of a house?
Yes, it would.
Now, did you find this firearm to be in good working condition?
Yes, it worked properly for me in test firing it.
And when you say that, can you just explain what that means?
Again, we go through the firearm, we take notes, we make sure it's in functioning order. It did not malfunction in any way. When I pulled the trigger to the rear, it functioned as I would expect a rifle to function. When I test fired it, I didn't have any issues with misfires or anything like that.
Okay. Now, again, it sounds like a silly question, but to use this firearm, you would have to hold it.
That's correct.
It has a trigger function.
It does.
Can you tell the jury what that is and how that applies, how you fire this firearm?
Sure. The trigger must be depressed to the rear to release the firing pin. So that the trigger has to be depressed with each round fired as a semi-automatic. So with each pull of the trigger, a round is fired.
So when you say that, when this firearm, we've had evidence that Mr. Cooper was shot twice on his face. For that to happen, will someone have had to pull the trigger on two separate occasions?
Yes.
And this firearm will not just go off by itself. Someone would have had to hold it, point it, pull the trigger 2 times for it to make those 2 shots on Mr. Cooper's face.
The trigger has to be depressed to the rear. As for holding, it could be sitting on a table and the trigger could be depressed to the rear. So, but the trigger has to be pulled to the rear.
And just to clarify that, the firearm won't go off by itself. It just won't do that from what you tested and found it to be in good working condition.
Correct.
I have no further question for this witness at this time. Thank you.
Any cross-examination, Mr. Hardbaker?
None from us, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. You may step down. Do you have another witness this morning? Okay, well, let's get started and go till lunch once she's here. If anybody wants to stand up and stretch while we're waiting a minute, go ahead. All right, let's all go ahead and have a seat.
The state recalls Brenda Reinhardt.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and swear you in again. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving today will be the truth?
Yes.
All right, and just for the record again, just give us your name.
My name is Brenda Reinhard, Reinhard.
Mr. Kodiaga?
Thank you. Ms. Reinhardt, it's still morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've recalled you. You were here yesterday. Your testimony yesterday had covered DNA and tests that you've done in this particular case.
Yes.
Okay. And as part of this investigation, did you also have a chance to examine a rifle, a 1022 Ruger rifle with serial number 003-61269?
Yes, I do remember that rifle. I would have to look at my notes to confirm the serial number, but yes.
Will it help to look at your notes to just confirm that serial number?
Yes, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
And I also have a copy of your report if you want me to give you that.
Yes, it was 003-61269.
Do you remember when you would have examined this rifle for DNA?
Yes.
Can you tell us when you examined it?
I examined it in December 17th of 2024.
And permission to approach?
You may.
Show you what's being admitted as state exhibit 298. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Ms. Reinhardt, is that the same weapon that you examined?
Yes, it is. It also has the Iowa Crime Lab orange sticker on here that was on there that is when it's brought into the lab that's placed on there.
When you examined this item, what were you examining it for?
So normally when we get in firearms, the lab, we will swab the rough areas of the gun. And on this particular firearm, it is very smooth. So a lot of times we look at the grip or even the forearm might have some rough areas, but it was all smooth. So the rough areas that I swabbed would have been the safety, which is on the other side over here. So that's a rough area. I also looked at the charging handle, which is right here. And then I also swabbed the trigger. And I also took additional swabs. So I did take from a smooth area, which there was no latent print examination on it. So I did take from the stock area, which would be this area where I would hold the gun, and then also the forearm. So this entire area I also took swabs of as well.
You described it as having a lot of smooth areas. Does that cause problems for you in terms of getting good material from it?
Yeah, typically rough areas are a better source for DNA because they do have those grooves that DNA can get into. And sometimes there's latent print examinations, so we do leave most of the smooth surfaces for them as well.
Okay. When you looked for swab for DNA from this rifle, were you able to find or get detect factors that were sufficient for you to test?
No. Of the 3 sets of swabs that I looked at, they were either too weak for conclusive interpretation, or there was some, excuse me, let me look really quick. Yeah, in all 3 of them, the DNA factors detected from the swab of the safety, charging handle, and the magazine release were too weak for conclusive interpretation. And then the swabs of the trigger was too weak. And the DNA factors from the swabs of that forearm, and the forearm right here, and then the stock area was also too weak for conclusive interpretation.
And in layman terms, what does that mean?
There was just too little DNA, so I couldn't tell, even if you had a known sample that was brought into the lab, I have nothing for comparisons, too little or too weak.
So even if you have Houston Denker's DNA at that time, or the defendant's DNA at that time, you cannot compare because what you're getting from the firearm is just too weak to be able to say, yes, that's Karina Cooper touched it, or Houston Denker touched it.
Correct.
And fair enough to say, you talked about this yesterday, but just to highlight that to the jury, what are some of the reasons why you can't find, why you end up at a result of 2 weeks for interpretation?
It depends on how often or how long an individual has touched or handled a gun. I know if you're a gun enthusiast, you might clean your gun a lot, so it could have been wiped off, it could have been cleaned, gloves could also be worn, and smooth surfaces, that's also another area. But yeah, guns, we don't really get great DNA results depending on how it was handled.
Okay. And by the time you're testing this gun, it's sometimes in 2024?
Yes, it was 2024 when I examined the gun.
So time has passed from when this gun was suspected to have been used in the killing back in 21 to 24. So this passage of time to people handling it, to cleaning it, to all those factors will lead to the results of 2 weeks for conclusive interpretation.
Yes, I don't know how it was handled between those times.
I'll retrieve the weapon and then I'll have no other question.
Mr. Hawbaker, any cross-examination?
None, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may
Thank
step
you.
down. And my understanding, Mr. Kodiaga, was that's it before lunch. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Yeah. Got 7 witnesses done this morning, so can't expect the state to have more than that here, so that's good. Ladies and gentlemen, so we are going to start a little early. You folks coming back and being ready to go by 1:20, does that work? So we start, say the same amount of break. Is that going to work from your end? It will. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you be back here ready to go by 1:20. I would again remind you of the admonition that I've given you earlier. Again, hit the high points. Don't talk to anybody about the case. Don't let anybody talk to you about the case. Keep an open mind. Don't do any type of research or investigation related to this case on your own. And avoid any media accounts and social media commentary or accounts related